latest set of announcements that have come from the centre. In fact, the cabinet has approved a whole host of reforms for the telecom sector to ease the financial burden. In fact, it described new dynamism to the sector, new investments, as well as more employment. The big takeaways essentially include a relief package that has a 4-year moratorium for unpaid dues by the telecom companies. Interest, however, will be levied if the moratorium is opted for. The definition of adjusted gross revenue paid to the government has also been changed so that all non-telecom revenue will be excluded from the dues as well. Penalties for telecom companies have been abolished. The centre has also announced 100% of foreign direct investment in the sector through the automatic route, this to encourage and incentivize foreign investments into the telecom sector. But what exactly does all this mean in terms of how much is it actually going to ease the financial burden of telecom companies? Because remember, telecom sector has been facing a lot of difficulties and have been reeling under a lot of debt with lots of dues to the government. And now this is going to help ease some of that burden, not entirely, but at least some of that burden. Let's first listen in to what was said at the cabinet briefing.
अभी जितने ड्यूज हैं टेलीकॉम सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स के, उनके लिए 4 साल का मॉरेटोरियम अप्रूव हुआ है. इस 4 साल के मॉरेटोरियम में एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात है कि सरकार के रेवेन्यू को बचाना भी जरूरी है. तो मॉरेटोरियम जो भी अवेल करेंगे उनको एक इंटरेस्ट देना पड़ेगा मॉरेटोरियम वाले अमाउंट पे, विच इज MCLR प्लस 2%. इस इंटरेस्ट के साथ मॉरेटोरियम अप्रूव हुआ है. इससे इंडस्ट्री में जो स्ट्रेस है, जो कैश फ्लो सिचुएशन का इश्यू है, वो इंडस्ट्री में आज खत्म हो जाएगा इस फैसले से.
So let's get in some more perspective in terms of how much is all of this going to benefit the telecom sector. I'm being joined by Jaideep Ghosh, CEO, Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas company, joining me at this point in time. Thank you very much, Mr. Ghosh, for joining us. Your essential takeaways from what's been announced here, because this is not really a bailout, but these are certain structural reforms that have been put into place to give some sort of a relief to the sector. And it is prospective, it's not retrospective. So the question of what's going to happen, for example, in a company like Vodafone Idea from the past issues is yet to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I would say what exactly you said. Somewhere this may be positioned as a relief package in response to certain operators' issues. I would actually call this as a structural and process reform, which has the potential to alter, of course, the entire telecom landscape, and also the investor friendliness and the image of the country overall. So that's what I would say. There is a long list of reforms, relief, process improvements. In short, several of them were in a long-standing wish list of the industry. For example, taking out the non-telecom revenues from the definition of adjusted gross revenue, on which each telecom operator has to pay a certain share of the revenues, and so on and so forth. I think these are long-standing wish lists which has been addressed, I would think, adequately for now and for in the future. And while you focused, and I understand people would focus more on the AGR moratorium, which is the financial aspects, I particularly like the idea, and it's been I've been following and speaking about the sector since ages, is the announcement of announcing a spectrum calendar and a roadmap in advance, so that operators can prepare and have their spectrum strategy well in advance. So in short, I think industry wish list has been addressed adequately, and should of course be a relief also for certain telecom operators at this point of time.
Right. The other part, Mr. Ghosh, is the 100% FDI that's been allowed through the automatic route now. But do you think this is going to be enough to actually attract foreign investors? Because the other aspect, which in fact in Kumar Mangalam Birla also pointed out in that letter that he wrote, is that investors want to see that intent of the government to ensure that it's not going to be a duopoly and it's going to be a larger marketplace for more players to come in. Do you think this is intent enough on that perspective?
See, I think 100% FDI in telecom was by and large, allowed. It's only that it was still automatic approval route till about 49%. So definitely it's an ease in the process and should improve the doing business in India, impression from the perspective of the country and also for the sector. I don't think that immediately we could see just merely because of these reforms or 100% FDI, a lot of foreign interest investor will come in actually running the operations, as in the telecom operations here, because that market is fairly now, balanced between the top three private operators and a little bit on of course, with the government operators, BSNL and MTNL. But definitely it will help in the process part of it, the expediting the process of investments and so on and so forth. Do remember there is a caveat here that the safeguards such as Press Note 3, etc., will still be applicable. However, in summary, definitely making it 100% automatic route should help the industry, at least in process efficiency and the investor-friendly image. I don't think this has anything much to do with resulting in a duopoly or anything like that merely because of this FDI process change.
Okay. All right. Let's get in another voice here. Vimal Vaklu, former chairman and MD, Telecommunications Consultants India Limited, is joining us on the phone line as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Your takeaways from this entire set of reforms or announcements that have come in for the telecom sector. Do you think this is going to be sufficient in terms of easing the financial burden and sort of helping out the sector as per what is needed?
Avani, my opinion is that it's going to be, it's really a big ticket reform. In the sense, one major thing is that AGR dues can be paid, a moratorium of 4 years. That will give a lot of relief to companies like Vodafone. And non-telecom revenue has been taken out of the AGR component. So that will be a big relief for all telecom service providers. Besides this, service spectrum charges validity being for 30 years instead of 20 years. I think it's going to be a big game changer. This is going to correct the business model of the telecom companies. There was a serious danger of Vodafone going bust, but now I think it'll help Vodafone in stabilizing, and at the same time, because 100% FDI is allowed, I think it'll ensure that more and more people invest further into the telecom sector in India, and it will not be reduced to a monopoly or duopoly.
Okay. All right. Jaideep Ghosh, do you believe that this is going to help Vodafone Idea stabilize, like Mr. Vaklu was pointing out? Because the reason I'm asking is because Vodafone Idea is at a different level when it comes to the kind of problems it's facing in terms of the amount of debt and other associated problems.
Yeah, I think my views could often be little bit contra or different. I think we are all, of course, the trigger point to make these reforms may have been because of Vodafone-specific issues. However, I would, as I said, I think these are long-term reforms of the industry. It of course, will give some relief to Vodafone Idea and also to, if I say Vodafone Idea, I have to also say to Airtel, who also has a due of about 27,000 crores to the government.
Yes.
And also to Tata Teleservices, which also has a much lesser but certain dues. So, but yes, Vodafone Idea is in a much larger dues to the government for spectrum and AGR also to the lenders. So of course they're financially in a certain situation, which is no secret. It of course will help Vodafone Idea at this point of time to somewhere. Do remember, as you said, it's all prospective. Okay. So, which is good. I mean, retrospective, I personally think was quite something which we could have avoided in the tax issue. Different matter though. But I think, this will definitely give some relief to Vodafone Idea, but let's not look at it, the entire reform package just for Vodafone Idea. Do remember the minister also said design in India, made in India, and export from India, telecom equipment and so on and so forth. that's got, that's not specific to any telecom operator or anything like that. So I think it's a good, package of reforms, long-term in nature, definitely will improve the situation, and also will provide relief to the telecom operators who have certain immediate dues to be paid to the government and so on and so forth.
Right. Mr. Vaklu, the other part about the moratorium that has been announced as well, 4-year moratorium, there is a caveat there with interest if you opt for that moratorium. Do you see companies opting for the moratorium given this caveat? Is it going to, even then, with this interest burden, help them going forward?
Yeah, there are two things. I agree that it's going to be interest on the amount, but there won't be any penalties as such. That's one part of it. Second, the retrospective tax, you'll remember a few weeks back, that also has been removed. And that will be a major relief for Vodafone, because that was one game changer for the Vodafone model, which actually crippled it. So I think that also is going to help. And yes, interest on AGR is fine, but not the penalties won't be there, and default conditions won't arise. Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Ghosh, final question to you. Is there, anything more perhaps that you would have liked to see in terms of these announcements, something that perhaps could have been added or something else that the sector needs at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, that's I could address this over next 1 hour, but I know we may not have anything close to that. So other issue, which is possibly a telecom regulatory authorities this thing now is around spectrum pricing, where it's good to have a roadmap and calendar. And I've been very vocal about it since many years that as operators do not really know when the spectrum auction is going to happen. Typically, it's in the Jan, Feb, March, to kind of boost the government financial year revenue, so on and so forth. But the spectrum pricing is pretty high, and in fact, today itself, my article is published in your group's print publication, that spectrum price in India, especially for 5G, which is expected sometime in the next calendar year, is way out of what it is in other countries. So I think this pricing of spectrum is what industry would also look for. And maybe we can wait for a while, because these reforms are, of course, significant in nature, and definitely along with for Vodafone Idea, at least with the retrospective tax amendment made, if they are able to avail that, then that should provide a lot of relief to Vodafone. But it's overall a good package. For now, I think it's quite substantial.
All right, we'll leave it there. Jaideep Ghosh, Vimal Vaklu, thank you so much for joining us with your perspective. This is going to at least provide some sort of relief for the telecom sector, which is reeling under a lot of various issues, least of which is debt.